Well, thank you all for being here. I think it's about time for our next presenter, Jamie Honke, Ralston High School, is going to be talking to us about the art of storytelling. She's going to begin her presentation by serenading us.
There was a time I was alone, nowhere to go and no place to call home. My only friend was the man in the moon, even sometimes he would go away too. Then one night as I closed my eyes, I saw a shadow flying by. He came to me with the sweetest smile, told me he wanted to talk for a while. He said, "Peter Pan, that's what they call me. I promise that you'll never be lonely." And ever since that day, I'm a lost boy from Neverland, usually hanging out with Peter Pan. And when we're bored, we play in the woods, always on the run from Captain Hook. Run, run, lost boy, they say to me, away from all of reality. Neverland is home to lost boys like me, and lost boys like me are free. Hola. I'm Jamie Honke, and that song is about Peter Pan. How many of you have heard of Peter Pan, Tinker Bell, Captain Hook? Today I'm wanting to talk to you about the art of storytelling, and what a wonderful keynote presentation that we were able to see, because all throughout while we were learning about transnational awareness, Dr. Compton Lilly was telling us stories. It wasn't just presentation of data and its longitudinal effects with sample sizes. It was through storytelling that we were able to connect with the experiences of the immigrant children and the international students and their experiences with transnational awareness. So hopefully, if you take anything away from my presentation today, it's how the art of a story can connect both language and culture and those elements together to build something that's compelling and comprehensible for our students that will last longitudinally for them as well. So I'm Jamie Honke. I teach Spanish at Ralston. I'm the World Languages Department Chair for Ralston Public Schools. In my context, I teach Spanish 3rd level, 4th level, AP, and our Spanish for Spanish Speakers program. But I also facilitate curriculum development across all of our levels and with our French program as well. So this idea can work in any language and in any kind of style, all the way from a novice level learner to an advanced level learner. It's just how you fine-tune your own guitar to be able to bring that instruction to your students. So what you're going to see today, I'm going to very briefly talk about what is comprehension-based communicative language teaching, also known as CCLT. And then I'm going to tell you a little story and show you how that you can deliver this story to your students and how you can develop a framework of storytelling with your students. And hopefully we can open the floor up to questions about technique or connection when we have that time. And then I'll also show very short snippets of how you can engage and assess and then lather, rinse, repeat. So usually in a public school context, data is what drives instruction. So how do we look at storytelling as a form of data to drive our instruction and move along the proficiency spectrum? So a few things. Language is a mental representation that is outside of our awareness. So when we look at a traditional learning view towards language instruction, we tend to take the natural order hypothesis and try to put into little boxes how students can learn a language. But actually, language is our own mental representation, and sometimes we're not even thinking about it as we're acquiring language. Input is the message that's received, and it has to be negotiated and interpreted for meaning. And in a comprehension-based instruction platform, we focus our input on compelling, relevant, understandable, focused messages. So usually the number one question I get when I talk about story-based education is, how do I get my students to be able to understand that? It's a whole story. They have to know all these elements. They have to receive everything, process it, negotiate meaning. I want you to feel comfortable in knowing that if I can teach myself to play the guitar using YouTube, you can take a foundation of storytelling, scaffold for your students, and you'll be able to develop and deliver these messages too. I've been playing guitar for about 2 years. I learned on a ukulele, and then I learned through YouTube. You can do it. We can do it. Comprehensible input is the acquisition of language through messages that are capable of being negotiated for meaning. And storytelling is as old as time. It's compelling, it's how we're wired, how we maintain our identity, and it provides the context in which we live. And that's from Teresa Jensen, and she's sitting in the back of the room. Because if you think about it, when you ask somebody about their day, they tell you a story. When you ask somebody about something that happened to them, they tell you a story. I work with teenagers. They constantly are coming up to me telling me their life story. Even if their life story revolves around the scooters that they walked in with in the morning, there's always a story behind everything. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna look at what the art of a story is. You probably learned this in your English class or your language arts class. It is an interdisciplinary connection to a language class. You can deliver language through storytelling by knowing the elements of the story. First, you start with the beginning. So in my song that I sang by Ruth B., there was a time when I was alone. That was the beginning of the story. And then you have a series of rising actions. This would be your verbs that would drive your plot. In the song, Peter Pan came to me at night and said, let's talk for a while, and then we fly off to Neverland together. In The Lion King, it starts off with Pride Rock and Mufasa telling Simba that one day all of this, everything the light touches, will be yours. And then the rising action. His uncle gets jealous, his uncle tries to kill him, Mufasa dies, spoiler alert. He runs away. He meets Timon and Pumbaa. They say, don't worry about responsibility, Hakuna Matata. And then he realizes that that's not his destiny, because Nala comes to him and, can you feel the love tonight? And then you get to the climax of the story. In the song, I didn't sing it. The climax of the story is when my feet touch the ground, I realize I finally have a family. I am a lost boy. In Lion King, the climax is the battle between Scar and Simba, and they fight because he finally has resolved his internal conflict of whether he's ready to be king or not. And he's resolved his external conflict of his uncle trying to kill him all the time. The falling action is the end of the story, and it ends in the resolution. So this isn't brand new information. This is just basic art plot diagramming of a story. If you keep this in mind, you can tell any story in any language, and it will deliver a message. Now, there's all sorts of other things that you can connect with. Earlier today, my poster presentation was about intersectionality and products, practices, and perspectives. One thing I do in my classes is I try to connect a moral message or some kind of aspect of identity to a message. So if I'm telling a story based off of off of a Dominican commercial about a bank, about a cactus who's ugly and nobody wants to touch him because he'll hurt them. And the end, he covers himself in marshmallows. The climax, he sees the bank and he decides to cover himself in marshmallows. Then the underlying message, which is outside the framework of this slide, would be about appearance and self-esteem and self-worth and love and value. So it's not necessarily a surface level story about there was a guy and he had no friends and he went to the store and he bought a bag of marshmallows and now he has friends. Stories can connect and reach people at a human level, and your students will remember them. One story that I tell in my class is called La Leyenda de Espantapájaros. I did not write it, The Legend of the Scarecrow. I teach it in a level 3 class. My students in AP still remember it because it's about friendship and connection and overcoming obstacles and overcoming prejudices. But it's about a scarecrow who wants to be friends with a crow. So, how do we do storytelling in a digestible process that's scaffolded so that when we deliver this message to our students, we feel comfortable in our own skin to be able to do it? One thing I do with this presentation is I always play the guitar in public because I'm terrified of playing the guitar in public. Getting over that own fear of not delivering the story the right way is the first step to delivering storytelling. The first time I ever played guitar in public was at my father's funeral. Probably the worst place you could play the guitar in public if you have stage fright. But once you get over that hurdle, then the second time's a lot easier, the third time is easier than that. Your first story might feel clunky. You will feel clunkier about it. So here's what we do. You have a description of a setting, a character, and the scenery. Then you have a description of the problem. Make your first story the most basic problem. Usually a problem somebody has or doesn't have something. In The Cactus and the Bank, the cactus has spikes and he has no friends. He needs human connection because in that story he sees a couple kissing and hugging and he wants to hug someone but he can't. He tries to touch his boss, just like high five, and he stabs him with his spikes. He wants to have friends, he doesn't have them. These are 3 high frequency verbs in French and Spanish and English. So you're developing high frequency verbal language, functional language. Then they have a problem that features more high frequency language. They go somewhere. They see someone. They talk to them. Simba goes somewhere, I don't know where he goes. He goes to the place where Timon and Pumbaa are.
The oasis.
The oasis. He sees Timon and Pumbaa, he talks to them. They say Hakuna Matata. Then he solves the problem or he doesn't solve the problem. Sometimes problems don't get solved. In Leyenda de Espantapájaros, spoiler alert, he dies. The scarecrow gets set on fire by the villagers. The problem does not get solved. The moral of that is about the crow, though. This is a framework, and I've included a URL to this presentation of what that looks like. So there was a fill in the blank. It's kind of like a Mad Lib. You could even give your students options on what that Mad Lib looks like. Who is named, they want. This incorporates functional language that's basic narrative. So if you want to have them present about a historical topic, they could still follow this framework. If you want them to describe a cultural feature, they could still use this framework. It's just a storytelling framework. Here's an example in Spanish, and I know I'm going quickly, but I'm running out of time. So this is a story I've told. There was a woman who was named Selena. Selena was from from the United States, and she was Latina. She liked to sing and dance. Very basic language, past tense. Selena had a problem. She wanted to sing in English, but she was not famous, nor was she popular. She needed to be popular in order to sing in English. This is about Selena Quintanilla Perez. She couldn't sing in English because the United States didn't want her to. So she became famous as a Mexican-American singer first. She died right before her crossover album. She could have been J-Lo, but J-Lo is now famous because of Selena, right? Here's the description of the setting and the resolution. If you want to connect it on a deeper level with intersectionality, you could talk about her as a female, you could talk about her as a young person, you could talk about her ethnicity and her cultural roots and how the United States received her. So this could even be a cultural storytelling topic. Or it could be about a cactus and a bank. It could be pared down, it could be brought up. You are in charge of your own guitar playing. It's however advanced you want to go with it. First, you would establish meaning. You talk through high frequency words. If you were here for Rachel's presentation, everything she does is to establish those high frequency communicative language topics. They pair together very well. This is just another idea. And then you check for understanding by constantly asking them questions. Yes, no questions, either or questions, circling through it. And you can assess them through free write. So here's an example of two people who just retold a story in Spanish. 15 minutes on the clock. They only get the word wall I have on my board. Write me a story. And then I go through the actful proficiency levels and I see where they are. It's not a proficiency assessment because it's a performance assessment, but I can say you can write in complete sentences, you can hit these indicators. So that was very fast how the art of storytelling. Are there questions that you might have in the time that we have left, which is like,
I have one question.
yes.
Do you support your stories with pictures when you tell them?
I do. It depends on what story I'm telling. So I'm just going back to this. So with the cactus in the banks, that's actually a commercial from the Dominican Republic. So I take screenshots of it and I tell the story with the pictures for visual support. With the scarecrow, that's also a video, but I have them draw as I tell the story so that we can connect a little differently to the story, and that one takes a little bit longer. You could connect with visuals. Usually with the very first few, I use a lot of visual support. Yes.
If you're telling a story, for example, in a Spanish 1 class, so first year Spanish, do you think it would be smart to just change all the verbs to, for example, the present tense? Or should I just like leave them in the tense that I would be
I've seen it
normally
done,
telling a story in?
I've seen it done several ways. A lot of the teachers I work with who teach level 1 keep the present tense to start, and then instead of there was, there is, and the high frequency verbs are pretty much the same. I have also seen some teachers, I have a friend who he will tell the entire story in the present tense as he's going, and then as they read it in the past tense. Or like the next day when he's recapping, he recaps in the past tense because that's more organic towards what the communicative piece would be.
Right.
But a lot of times novice level learners are in the present tense because the novice level indicator is present tense. But don't feel restricted to it.
Right.
What does your classroom management need to look like for this to be an approachable way of disseminating language?
That's a great question. I have a poster at the front of my room. They're not my rules, I got them from other people, but I have a poster. It's actually in English because the common language is English. And it says, when one person speaks, we listen to understand, sit up, square up, eyes clear, support the flow of the language. So if I ask a question, don't intentionally answer it wrong because it's funny. I've had that happen with teenagers. And everyone has to be sitting and paying attention and responsive. And if I have side conversations, I walk to my poster and I stop and I command respect. I make sure they're listening. We don't move on, usually. And we norm that a lot at the beginning. Yes, ma'am.
I often make up stories with my students at the same time, either from an image that they're creating or one that already exists. And I have a hard time, they're middle schoolers, getting past the problem of she loves me not, he loves me not. They get married, they get divorced, they I mean, I need a list of problems. Do you have a list of problems? I can't seem to get it past the love-hate stuff.
I don't have a list like well formed, but a few things I've done, because usually in high school their family all died or they have no friends is usually the common problems, and it's really sad. So one thing I have done in the past is I have broken the story up, and so we establish a character. If we're story creating and I'm not telling them a story, I'll ask them to write down 3 problems that they might have on a piece of paper, and they can do that in English if they don't have the language. And then I'll collect it and I'll pick the one that I want to go with the best. So you might have 25 people with no friends, and one person, has a great thing and you have control over that. Or you could, I would probably simply say, I'm so tired of the stories where people break up. Let's try to think of a non-romantic story. What are some other problems we could come up with for, and just kind of brainstorm, make a list. I found the secret problem is always my favorite when we're story creating, because some people don't want to say out loud what the problem is, but some kids are like really creative with it.
Whenever we do story, like before, when I preface, like when I teach the first one, we have a Google form and they can all submit like their ideas, and it goes from like names like of the characters that it's going to be to like the problem or like the setting when they're not real stories.
In addition to that, where sometimes there's free range answers, and that can be overwhelming and out of bounds at times, especially when you're teaching adolescents. I do forced choice answers. So I might come in thinking, okay, if it's a story I'm making up, does she want to be famous, or does she want to, I don't know, be kind? Not that all famous people are unkind, but I give them two options myself, and we pick one. And that way I can control the dialogue and the dynamic, and I can stay in bounds on the language, but they have some kind of choice in the outcome. It's called a choose your own adventure storytelling. So that could be an option too. That way you can move away from the things that they always say all the time. Any other questions you might have? Yes.
I'm gonna just do a little testimonial. I saw you do a one-word image at the mall a couple years ago, and that was like really what
it's about a
just
paperclip.
made me like take a little plunge back, into the CI and now CCLT world. And I just thought, I think I can do this. And I've been teaching for a long time and not doing that. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna give it a try. And it was just fascinating for the kids. And so I just want to encourage you to just give a shot to storytelling. It really gives, through the last session, student voice, being able to have say in like really kind of what you're learning about. And stories are just, they're so compelling. And if you're kind of thinking, maybe I don't know if I can make this work, I don't know if I have the personality to make this work, like not every teacher who does this has to be all, yay, this. Like you can be super low key.
This is the tone I speak in to my students. Yeah.
So there's a lot of YouTube videos of people who are doing stories with their students, and there's just so many ways you can do this. I just encourage you to give it a chance. Like it really does bring joy to your classroom.
So my very first story, I still remember it. I have a weird memory that I can't remember what I ate yesterday, but I can remember the first story I ever told to my Spanish students, and it was very awkward because I was trying to incorporate the Exprésate book, chapter 8, on shopping in the mall, and I didn't know what to do. And my evaluator was there videotaping me because I asked him to see how it goes. He was enthralled by it. So I was being videotaped. I had my students, it was a Spanish 2 class, they were present tense because we hadn't hit the past yet. And I was trying to incorporate all the vocabulary I could. And it ended up being, and I was story asking for my first go, like, fine, they will give me the right answers, Jesus, take the wheel. And what ended up happening is we had a girl that was named Bob with long orange hair, and she was fat, and she lost her milkshake. And she went to 7 stores in the mall to find it. And it was very awkward. And after that experience, they were fine. Nobody died after I told a story. And you know what? They're probably like all successful adults now. But it felt really awkward for me. It was like playing the guitar in public at a funeral. Like it's not a comfortable experience. So finding that scaffolding that I showed is a good way for you to drive, like, here's a story, I'm gonna fill in the blanks with it. And it'll guide me the way. I did not know what to do to storytell. I just threw it out there and we saw what stuck. And the story was a little clunky, but the next time I tried it, I tried a story that somebody had written called Gatos Azules by Adriana Ramirez. I watched her YouTube video and I took notes, and the next day I did it again. and tried over with a story that was established, and it went much better. This is an example of like where you could use a clip, a commercial, a visual story, and you just tell the story. So the cactus sees them kissing. They're in the Dominican. It's a little risque. The cactus sees them, and we talk about how he looks. We establish the character. The problem when this is an upper level, so it's got higher grammar. When the doors opened, he had already entered the elevator, so we're doing the past perfect. And look, he's so sad, you guys, because nobody wants to get in the elevator with him. His problem is that he has low self-esteem a causa de su apariencia. Because of his appearance, he has low self-esteem. His boss touches him and gets hurt. And one day he's walking down the street, and a little girl leaves the candy store, and she lets go of her balloon, and he goes to catch it, but it explodes. And she's like, "It's cool, bro." And she gives him a marshmallow, and he looks at it surprised, and before he eats it, he sees a bank, and he takes out some money from the bank, and then he covers himself. He buys a bunch of marshmallows, and he covers himself in marshmallows. So I'm telling this in the present tense right now, but I was telling it in the past tense and the past perfect to my students, and the imperfect subjunctive, but I wasn't telling them all the grammar I was using. I was just telling them the story. He covers himself in marshmallows, and now everyone wants to get in the elevator, and look, they take a selfie because now he has friends, and he even gets kissed by these girls. The end, right? So the stories can connect you.